My guest today is Meghan Murphy, writer and host of the Same Drugs podcast. We discuss Imane Khelif, the biological male who won an Olympic gold medal in women's amateur boxing, the financial roots of trans activism, and why Generation Z is comfortable with the act of selling out. Meghan is a leader amongst rational thinkers and a courageous voice who isn't afraid to point out the obvious while the rest of society turns a blind eye to objective truth. This conversation is an informative dive into the ugly reality we now find ourselves in, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. Stay tuned. Meghan Murphy, back again. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Good. I'm really glad we got a chance to talk again. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. I feel like we have a strange kinship being from the same place in the same era. So I think you and I see eye to eye on a lot of things. And I want to start off by talking about, it's been a rough summer for the ladies. Women's boxing in the Olympics kind of showed us why we need separate classes for men and women. You've been talking about it a lot. You recently had a guest on your podcast where you guys discussed it. Can we talk about that a little bit? I mean, what the fuck is happening? How did we reach a place where men are competing in women's boxing at the highest amateur level?
Yeah, this situation is interesting because I think that we're used to, when we're talking about women's sports, and I'm sorry that my little dog is protecting
all good. Let him go
from intruders. We're often talking about protecting women's sports from men who are identifying as women, but very clearly men, once did identify as men and then decided that they wanted to identify as women, perhaps so that they could excel in swimming or at the elite level, whereas they couldn't before as men. In this case, we're talking about this person, Imane Khelif, who is Algerian, and Redux, which is a great platform. If you're not familiar with it, it's a platform that covers like more of this trans insanity than any other platform by far. And they broke this story saying that the IBA, so the International Boxing Association, had disqualified Imane Khelif because they did two DNA tests. There were two DNA tests that were showing XY chromosomes, so male chromosomes. So they disqualified him. No one really knows for sure what the situation is, because the only person who can really clarify what the situation is the athlete himself, and he won't do it mysteriously. But the speculation is that he has a DSD condition. And people get really confused about this thing because people think that intersex is maybe like a middle sex or a third sex, or it means that you're ambiguous and no one really knows. But that's not true. What is usually that's an outdated term as it is. But what we're talking about in general are either males or females who have some kind of sexual disorder. So maybe they have ambiguous genitalia. In the case of a man, he might have internal testes, that have not descended. Maybe they have genitalia that sort of looks like it might be a vagina. There's no penis there, unclear. But even in these cases, it's generally still clear that the individual is a man or a woman, and that's really easy to determine. Like you can determine sex via a blood test or a DNA test. A DNA test is just a cheek swab. So the Olympics got rid of sex testing, I think, in 2000, and now they have this situation which has become a big controversy, really because Redux broke this story, and of course since then a number of other outlets have picked up on it, saying, this is a male. And maybe in Algeria they didn't know at first. Maybe, I don't know if this is what happened. Maybe this baby was born and they thought that it was female, or they thought it would be easier to raise it as a female. And nonetheless, at some point, if they didn't know already, they would have figured out that this wasn't the case. Imane himself would certainly know because he would have gone through puberty as a male. I mean, it's just, I think it's really ridiculous for people to pretend like you don't know one way or another, especially when it's so easy to determine. And, you know, the claim from the IOC, from lots of media outlets, from Imane himself is that, you know, I'm a woman, stop harassing me. And it's like, I just, it's so ridiculous and crazy to me that this would be treated as harassment. Like we're talking about sport. We're talking about elite athletics. We need to know if you're male or female. Like that's like the most basic thing. That's like the primary category that we're dealing with, male, female sports. Males have an inherent advantage no matter what. And yeah, the athlete is declining to show tests that disprove what the IBA is saying. And there's been reporters that have come forward. One of his old trainers has come forward and said, yes, and, you know, confirmed they did these tests and this is what it showed. And he won gold in women's boxing at the Olympics. And yeah, it's like the controversy is mind-blowing to me because so many people want to defend him. And apparently he's trying to sue J.K. Rowling and Elon Musk and whoever else for, you know, online harassment, which is a ridiculous thing to try to criminalize as it is. You know, like, what do you think happens on the internet? People harass you, like normal people, never mind people like me or like a well-known athlete or whatever. We are constantly being harassed. Is the internet like you'll live, you can just block them. But, you know, it's like, okay, you want to take them to court for harassment, but you still just won't do a DNA test and show us your results so that you can, you know, address this controversy. And again, it's like, I wonder why. Like, to me, that's almost an admission that the XY accusations are true. If not, you know, and all that aside, he looks like a man. Like, if you look at him, he looks male.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, so this one is kind of close to my heart because I've spent most of my life involved in boxing and combat sports. So I know a lot about this. First of all, the IBA is a wildly corrupt governing body. So if they're saying, look, this is a dude, it's a fucking dude. Like, if they're admitting it, then yeah. But second of all, like, look, as somebody who has sparred with hundreds, if not thousands of women, like it's not even like something you have to talk about in a gym. Like, it's like when you spar with women, you take your foot off of the gas pedal. You decrease your speed, decrease your power, not because they're not any good. I mean, I'll tell you like this, when you're sparring with women are more dangerous to spar with than men because women tend to have a bit of a chip on their shoulder, right? They're going in the ring with a dude and they want to prove that they belong there. So like for me, like I'm always like more defensive minded when I spar with women because I'm like, she's coming for me. Like she's really going to come at me. And I don't care what whether it's male or female, somebody's punching you in the face, it hurts. Right. But in every gym, like it's an unspoken rule. Like if you spar with women, pull your tone it down, bring it down a bit because there are obvious physical advantages to being a man. Like it's just what it is. Right. Like, and so what blows my mind is that the Olympics, the IOC were okay with this. And that's how deeply or how far that ideology has seeped into society. Like we're talking about the biggest international sports competition on earth has compromised itself to such a degree that they will allow a man to fight women on an internationally televised in an internationally televised sporting event. And no surprise, he won. Of course. I mean, I watched some of the clips. I didn't watch any of the fights, but I watched some of the clips and I'm like, yeah, this is a dude. He's not very good at what he does. He's not a very good boxer, but yeah, this is a dude. This is a guy fighting women who are just not physically capable of the things that he's capable of. Like there's one clip that I saw where I think it was the first fight with the Italian girl where he
Yeah.
punched her in the face, and you could actually see her whole internal, like everything inside of her head shake. And that was when she quit, because she was like, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm not getting brain damage at the Olympics. And the worst part about it is this, and this is something that people don't know, and I wrote about this on X, but what people don't realize is that for boxers, for amateur boxers, the Olympics is typically a launching pad into a professional career. The Olympics is where you show up and and you really show your stuff. Floyd Mayweather, he's a great example. He was an Olympic boxer. He was a gold medalist, right? That was the launch pad for him into professional boxing, and it's like that for all boxers. The Olympics is not. I mean, of course, you want to be a gold medalist. Of course, you want to win. Being an Olympic gold medalist puts you a cut above the rest. But really what it is it's a platform for you to show the world who you are. And these girls who have trained day in and day out just as hard as any man were cheated of that.
Yeah, it was totally heartbreaking to see him fight Angelina Carini, the Italian woman, who bailed after 46 seconds because the punches were too hard. And, like, if you're a female boxer, you've been punched a lot of times by women. And as you were saying, you've sparred with men too. Like, the difference. That's the other thing, is all these boxers have come out, not like beyond Angela, but past opponents of Imane, these female boxers who say, like, yeah, I knew right away that he was male because his punches felt so different and hurt so much more. And Angela Carini pulled out because she was worried that her life was in danger. And it is, it's really, really dangerous to women to be in a boxing ring with a man. I mean, it's horrific. And we saw the video of her breaking down and crying after that fight when Imane won the fight. It's just so unfair, and it's so sick to see the IOC defending that. And, their response is like, well, what, do you want us to go back to sex testing? And it's like, yes, we want you to go back to sex testing. Obviously. Why aren't you doing sex testing? And, I don't know why, but I suspect that it would interfere at this point anyway with the allowance of these men identifying as trans to compete as women, which they are. And, this is their ideology that they've decided to support and go along with, or to pretend that it's not their problem and it's the responsibility of the various countries and sports bodies. That's the other excuse is, they put the responsibility out of their hands and into the hands of these countries. So Algeria says this is a woman, then it's a woman. Like, what? Look, they gave us a birth certificate, female.
Right. So wasn't there a similar controversy around the Chinese boxer?
Yeah, there was a guy from Taiwan.
And he was male too, competing as a woman, correct?
I think it's the same situation. I mean, again, like, the only person that can confirm for sure is the athlete himself. It's not, the IBA does not have the right to release the private medical documents of these individuals. The only people who have the right to do that are the individuals themselves. But yeah, there was also, so Redux reported on Imane Khelif and the Taiwanese boxer whose name I can't recall. And yeah, that's been less of a controversy, I think, because the Taiwanese didn't try to, make a bunch of publicity around it and start trying to sue people and defend himself on social media. And there hasn't been like this feminization campaign, which I don't know if you saw that video that the Algerians put out to prove that.
Oh, I did. Yeah,
you pretty little girl.
That's right. You posted that video, right? Because when there's
with a bunch of filters on and makeup, and like these like sort of girly punches.
But it's still like a dude in a dress. Like to me, like I watched that. I think you posted it, and I watched it, and I'm like, this is still a dude in a dress. It's a pretty dude, right? But like, if I was at a bar and I was 20 drinks deep, falling over drunk, I would still know not to get in a cab with that guy. Yeah, right. Like, and see, like, for me, like, I look at this like, what's the point in competing in the first place? Because the Olympics is as far as that athlete is going to go, right? There is no boxing promotion in the world, especially after the IBA stated that, that he has XY chromosomes, right? There's no boxing promotion in the world that's going to sign him to a professional contract. So, I mean, either he competes as like a sideshow on, weird Japanese fight cards, like they have them all the time, but either he competes as a sideshow or this is it. This is the end of the line. So what's the purpose in competing as a woman, right? Like there's no purpose. You're not gaining anything from it. And in fact, if anything, you've just kind of advertised to the world that you cheated on like a grand scale, right? And so that brings me to my next point or my next point of conversation. I wanted to talk to you about a piece that you wrote called "It's the Funding Stupid," because I felt like the whole trans thing kind of disappeared from the mainstream conversation for a while. It just seemed like after the WPATH files came out and, England started to pull back and different countries started to pull back and say, okay, look, like we're going to stop mutilating children here because we're starting to realize what we're doing to like future generations. Like certain people, it seemed like certain people grew a conscience. But now all of a sudden, it seems like this conversation is starting again. Like we're back here. And you wrote a really beautiful piece. I encourage everybody who's watching this to go and read it, where you kind of broke down where this all came from. So can you talk about it a little bit, like the roots of trans activism, where it comes from and how it was funded?
Yeah, so a lot of my research on this has come via Jennifer Billick. I don't know if you know her. She recently published a book, I believe, through a feminist press in Australia. And so I encourage people to look up her work. I've had her on my Feminist Current podcast before. I should have her back on the same drugs sometime. But there has been other reporting that's been done on this, although it hasn't really made a splash, because I think maybe it's not the fun narrative, it's not the preferred narrative. The left, of course, wants this is a marginalized population who's constantly under threat of violence and we need to protect them, and that means we need to let them into the girls' change room to keep them safe. And then I think that a lot of the people who've, started to learn about what's going on with gender identity ideology and maybe getting upset about it, I think that, we see essentially these like pervert parades and we see all these like, gross like fetishists really parading around on the street at the pride parades, or again, like accessing women and girls' change rooms or making a fool of themselves by, competing against girls in swimming or wrestling or boxing or whatever. But, and people have been, and people including myself have been trying to figure out how this all happened for so long, because there's sort of lots of smaller reasons. There's the autogonophile reason, which is that, most men who are identifying as trans women who are adults are autogonophile. So they started out having a fetish around wearing women's clothing, imagining themselves as women. Often they're watching, tranny porn, as it's called. And that kind of takes over their life, often because they start out with a fetish and then they start finding these online forums about transgenderism and they're like, oh, maybe I'm transgender, and it starts to move out of the bedroom and they want to be out in public performing this woman face. This is all part of their fetish. And then there were these sexologists like John Money and others who were essentially experimenting to see if they could do these sex changes and, trying to replace male genitalia with female genitalia, which is impossible, of course, but, some kind of hole that could be used for penetration, that's what a vagina is, right? So I'm being sarcastic to anyone.
Oh, no, I was just about to say, yeah. Maybe clarify that one, Meg.
These men think that vaginas are for, which I think says a lot about the like misogyny behind this movement. There's the academic context. It's true that within the university, what was once women's studies, became gender studies in around 2010 to like 2009, 2010, and it became very Judith Butlerian, wherein nobody knows what a woman really is, and it's just a social construct. And maybe you can perform gender, you can perform femininity, you can perform masculinity, and who cares really about the body? And nothing is real, it's your own identity, and I don't know how you interpret your own self. It all is very narcissistic if you think about it. But the way that transgenderism really caught on and took over institutionally was really just about funding. And a lot of these organizations, like Planned Parenthood and the organizations that used to advocate for gay rights and, didn't really have much to do anymore because gay rights had been won, essentially, in order for them to keep going and in order for them to get funding, they had to get on board with this trans stuff. And people don't want to lose their jobs. So they did. And, it's the same reason even why transition houses across Canada, with the exception of Vancouver Rape Relief, because they do their own fundraising, why they've all caved to this as well. I think this is like one of the worst this is like one of the worst places for this to be allowed. These are women who are escaping situations of domestic violence, or they're escaping rape, and they're trying to heal from really horrific abuse that's been inflicted on them by men, and maybe they have to share a room or a bunk bed with some crazy man. But everybody's caved because they can't get the funding if they don't. And Vancouver Rape Relief lost a lot of funding by refusing to cave to this ideology and by maintaining a women-only collective and women-only space. But there's a lot of very, very, very wealthy billionaires who are funding all of this. The Pritzker family, for one. A lot of these billionaires are connected to big pharma as well, which I think is telling. Big tech, big pharma. They're invested in transhumanism, and that's something else that Jennifer Billick has written about a lot, actually. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, they've injected all of this funding into the universities, into the NGOs, into these charities, and that's really the big reason why this all took over and why it's been so hard for us to fight, the little people. It's hard to fight billionaires, and it's hard to fight all of these institutions. Like, the public is changing their mind about transgenderism. We're seeing way more pushback against this than ever before. But institutionally, they're all captured. And again, so much of it is just because they're reliant on funding.
Wow. And so aside from obvious profit motives, like, say, for example, like you said, being heavily involved in big pharma, I mean, you can see where the connection is there between, pharma and transitioning anyone, really, right? I mean, you're talking about medicalizing human beings for the rest of their lives, right? Like,
Yeah.
I read a thread, a horrible, tragic thread about a young woman who was transitioning to be male, technically male, I mean, superficially. And I mean, just the insane amounts of complications, like health complications that she had. And she eventually died. She eventually lost her life because the complications were just, she had immense amounts of internal bleeding, right? Because, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, you're talking about completely changing somebody physically. You're talking about creating a penis. You're talking about hysterectomies. You're talking about a mastectomy. You're talking about, like, these are medical procedures that are like last resort for most circumstances, right? Like, I mean, if you have breast cancer, a mastectomy or double mastectomy is like a last resort surgery, right? Same with ovarian cancer or cervical cancer. Like a hysterectomy is a last resort. And these are people who are undergoing these procedures willingly and trying to have their sexual organs reassigned, which it's not, I mean, we just don't have the technology to do that. And even if we did, you can't fight nature. You just can't, right? Like
No.
nature wins every time. And so do we know, like, or do we have an idea of what the motives are, aside from, like, are these ideological motives that keeps them funding things like this?
I mean, I think that the reason why there's this concept of the trans kid and why they've decided that they wanted to attach this born this way narrative to transgenderism is to justify these adult male desires to either identify as women or to profit from all of this. So if they say, you know, we were just born this way, we can't help it, it's not a choice, some people are just born trans, then naturally there have to be trans kids. And it has to be a medical procedure. It has to be, it's a life-saving medical procedure, for kids to have to first go on puberty blockers and then hormone treatment and then maybe get a mastectomy or, have their genitals mutilated or whatever. Um, that's all part and parcel. But also the thing is that if you stop kids from going through puberty, which the puberty blockers and the hormones do, um, they pass better as adults. So if you stop a boy from going through puberty as a male and transition him and keep him on hormones and give him on these surgeries, he's much more likely to look, more feminine than masculine. I can't say exactly what the motives are behind all of that. There's probably varying motives, but one of them surely is profit, because like you said earlier, you have a patient for life. Not only does this person need to be on these hormone treatments for life, but they're going to have and get all these very expensive experimental surgeries that usually you have to do more than once because they don't work or there's complications. Especially the phalloplasty is particularly gruesome, and usually the body, so that would be like a female or a girl who's trying to transition to become male, and they want some version of a penis attached to their body. It doesn't work. Like, the body usually rejects it, and you get all sorts of infections. And there's many, many, many stories that you can read from these so-called trans men or the detransitioners, where they just have to go back in and keep getting the surgery redone or fixed, or they have to deal with these infections. It's very painful. So that's a lot of money going somewhere to the people doing these surgeries. I guess the government is paying for, funding these surgeries in Canada. So, I think there's a profit motive, again, for big pharma. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's so many different angles that you can look at, but certainly there is a big profit motive. And, you have all these big progressive organizations and that are funded by people like George Soros and Jennifer Pritzker and the Arcus Foundation and John Stryker. They're funding all the LGBT organizations. They're funding Planned Parenthood. They're funding the ACLU. They're funding the Democrats. I mean, it's massive when you start looking into it. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, et cetera, et cetera. And these people and these groups, like, I don't know that they believe what they're selling. I kind of doubt it, but but they, they want to keep their jobs or their status or their power or their organization or their institution or whatever, and they're sacrificing kids to do so.
It's, I mean, call me crazy, a conspiracy theorist, whatever, but I really truly believe that depopulation has to be at least part of this.
I mean, they're sterilizing kids, right?
And mutilating children. They're ensuring that this next generation, a lot of them won't ever be able to reproduce. under any
No, I mean, they're
circumstance.
not even going to be able to have sex, a lot of these kids, like when they're adults, because their
Yeah.
genitals are going to be so mangled and they won't be able to experience the pleasure of sex. And then they're on all these weird drugs and hormones that, of course, impact your libido. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Right. And so there has to be, that has to be part of it. It has to be, because what, like, why else would you do all this? I mean, I understand the money aspect. I understand the profit motive, but there's a million ways to make a buck, especially if you're, an evil, dark, or overlord, elite.
Yeah, prescribe the population like a legal form of heroin or meth. They'll be hooked for life. It's a great
Right.
plan.
Right.
If only someone would think of that.
Right. But why go through the trouble of, indoctrinating children into an ideology and, mutilating them the way that they do? Like, I mean, it's like, to me, it does seem to me like a form of torture, right? Because like you're literally completely disfiguring a young person, like a young human being, that and ensuring that they will never have a normal life ever. Like I
No, and
saw.
you'll never be a healthy human being. I mean, you need to go through puberty in order to
That's right.
be a functional, healthy adult.
Right.
And being on all these drugs cause all sorts of side effects, in terms of brain development and bone development. And it increases your risk of cancer, of course.
Yeah. And this is anecdotal, but I was watching this video. There's a random video I saw the other day of like, I can't, it was like a festival or something. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like this big fat, I don't know, it looks like like a fat, sloppy, looks like a trans man who still has breasts. He's flopping around all over the place on stage, and like he's wearing a vest and his tits are hanging out, and he's fat and sloppy and gross, but he looks like a man. And I look at that and I'm like this, I hate to say this because I'm sure it's a person with feelings, but this is a circus freak.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, like this person has been reduced to this, to writhing around and flopping around on stage in front of thousands of onlookers, or hundreds at least. And I don't know what they were doing, dancing, performing, but this is what this human being has been reduced to.
I mean, it's like an attack on our aesthetic, right? Like it's a normalization of the grotesque and the ugly and the wrong and the freakish. Which I don't know. I mean, I'm not the person to talk about this. You probably can speak to this better than I can, but I know that Tucker Carlson talks about this too. But, it's like we also in Vancouver are turning the city into an ugly place with all these glass towers, and there's no old things, and there's no culture, and there's no tradition. And yeah, all these buildings have no character, and the people in Vancouver now also have no character, and it feels like it's attached to this thing where there's no beauty anymore, and we don't even really know what beauty is. And also we're supposed to pretend that that's beautiful, this like obese, disgusting, unhealthy, sickly fat man with some form of breast, who has all these grotesque surgeries and is on all sorts of drugs. That's sort of been a common thread over the past 10 years, is forcing us to normalize gross things, forcing us to not be judgmental, to not shame, to accept, fetishes being displayed in public, to accept obesity as normal. Some people just have like a fat gene. It's like, no. I mean, yeah, sure. Some people have, I don't know, thyroid problems or health problems or whatever. Maybe some people are more prone than others, but like there shouldn't be any reason for there to be a fat kid.
No,
there used to be fat kids. Why are there fat kids? Like, no, a fat kid is wrong. And it's your responsibility as an adult to make sure your kid's not fat. You're the one responsible for feeding and taking care of your kid. Like, I can't remember if I told you this or somebody else this, but I had a friend who, she had a girl who was, kind of chubby and getting overweight. And I don't know, I always get angry when I see this happening because I'm like, this poor girl is now going to struggle for life with her weight.
Yeah,
And that's so hard, especially as a girl. She's
for
going to
sure.
have this insecurity and these issues and this struggle for life because you've set these patterns for her as she's growing up, and you're, um, altering her body for life. She's going to have to fight this for her life. But she kind of like put it on the girl, like on her daughter, like, oh, she needs to make better food choices. And I was like, what? It's like, just don't keep candy in the house. Like,
Yeah,
why are you giving her a bowl of ice cream with gummy worms and popcorn in it? Like, you could just not have this in her house. Like, I wasn't allowed to have that stuff in the house when I was a kid, and I'm sure that I was really mad about it. Like, I'm sure
yeah,
that I complained
for
about it
sure.
all the time,
Yeah,
that we didn't have any sugar or processed food in the house because all I wanted was sugar and processed food. But I'm not the adult and I don't buy the groceries, so I didn't get to choose.
yeah,
Ergo, I was not a fat child.
yeah, yeah. Well, Whole Foods and exercise fixes all of that stuff.
Yeah,
Fixes,
dude, go outside and play.
yeah, fixes 99% of the health issues that are out there, and I mean that, like
I
99%. I'm not a
know. It's
doctor,
not
but
even that complicated. I mean, it
no,
can, like, it's hard to change your lifestyle, and it's actually really hard to access healthy food. So I shouldn't say it's not complicated because I'm in BC right now, and I'm like traumatized every time I go to the grocery store because it's
right,
so expensive, and
right,
like, and it's
yeah,
even more expensive if you're trying to eat healthy food, like if you're trying to
yeah,
find like grain-fed meat and stuff like that and good quality produce.
yeah,
It's
yeah. No,
really, it's hard. It's hard to eat healthy actually, but
yeah, it is. But
it's the
like,
best way to heal, and it's the best way to stay healthy,
yeah, and
mind, body, and soul.
absolutely. And like, I mean, as a dad, I have two kids, and we the thing is you just don't introduce that stuff into your house, period, right?
Yeah.
Like in our house, our kids drink water with their meals, just like the
Yeah.
rest of us. Like,
I'm drinking
for
water
me,
right now. Like, the idea of like
this
drinking
is,
juice or pop instead of water is weird to me. And so many people,
yeah,
I'm like, why are you drinking a Diet Coke? Like,
yeah.
just have a water. Water is great.
Well, like for me, like I'm not, I'm a little bit more of a princess, right? Like I just straight water just doesn't do it for me. So
Lemon water. Lemon water
exactly,
with salt in it is great.
there it is. I squeeze a slice of lemon into it, and there I'm good to go. So for us, like, not saying I'm a perfect parent. I'm far from it. The thing you realize once you become a parent is that your parents had no idea what the fuck they were doing. We're
Right.
all just winging it, like all of us, right? But
Well, I'm
like
not
for
perfect with my health either. Like, I say all
right.
this, but then it's like 11 p.m. I'm like, I wish I had some cake.
Yeah, no,
You
for
know?
sure. Yeah,
Of like a salty snack.
right, but the key to that is like that being a treat, and that's the way we do it in our house, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're not perfect parents. Like, Friday night rolls around and it's like, I don't feel like cooking. My wife doesn't feel like cooking. Fuck it, let's get the kids a happy meal, because we know whatever we get, tandoori chicken or chicken shawarma or whatever we get is going to be impossible. It's going to be a huge fight. So we'll get the kids happy meals. We get our thing, and then everybody's happy, and that's we that shit
Yeah,
just
'cause it's
happens. But
Friday night.
that's right. But it's a treat. And that's
Yeah.
the thing is like, for us, if we have like a bottle of soda in the house, like, our kids know, like, that's a treat. That's a treat. That's not an everyday thing. Like, grocery day.
Yeah.
The thing that people can do, and for people listening, is that berries, you can do berries, like, berries are always generally pretty plentiful and relatively inexpensive, right? So, like, we do a lot of strawberries, blueberries, raspberries in our house, and cherries during the summertime. And
Berries are so good for you too.
yeah, and so it's just a matter of making conscious decisions about what you feed your children, right? And I don't ever buy the whole, like, oh, they're just built like that, because, well, they can then you can make adjustments in the diet. If it's a thyroid issue, there are dietary ways to around that, right? Like, there are ways to fix it. You just got to commit yourself to it. And look, you and I are both adults, we're writers, as well as I know, like, 90% of the time it's like, I just don't have time for this shit. I'm going to get a fucking Big Mac because I got to wrap this thing up. I got to get it done,
Or like, I'm sure I'd be in better shape if I worked out 5 days a week, but I only have time to do it 3 days a week. So I'm just kind of trying to maintain. But like, there's always, it's like I'm not happy. I'm like back in Canada right now, and for whatever reason that means, I think it's so strange because I have like I have a healthier lifestyle and routine in Mexico than I do in Canada in a lot of ways. And so much of that is just about like access.
Yeah.
I drink a lot more in Mexico, but I don't count that as an unhealthy part of my regimen. But like the raw milk that I buy is just up the street, and when I'm walking home from the gym, there's all these great produce places, and the produce in Mexico is so good and it's so cheap, and same like all the eggs are local and they're so good and they're so cheap, and my butcher is across the street and that's so good and so cheap.
Right.
And here I'm like, okay, I have to drive to the grocery store. It's going to cost me $100 to buy. Like everything that I buy, I'm just like cringing. Like in Mexico, I eat beef every day. Like I'll eat steak or beef every day. Here, I'm like, I've realized I was starting to feel this. Sorry, this is boring now, but like I was starting to feel low energy here, and I was like, that's weird. I haven't really experienced this in a long time, not since back when I was like 30 and I was almost a vegetarian, and I was like, oh, I'm not eating any red meat, and I wasn't eating enough fruit, and it was because it's just so expensive. Like, so I don't know. I don't remember where I was going with this, but I guess I'm just complaining and also.
Listen, I'm lucky. I'm in Alberta. I'm in Alberta where beef is plentiful. So like last night I bought 2 grass-fed top sirloin steaks for $16, right? And that's 2 meals for me for this week, right?
Super cheap. Yeah. I just bought a box of filet mignons from this guy who sells meat out of his truck on the island, and they worked out to be, they were like 9-ounce steaks, so they're good size for me. I wouldn't eat a bigger steak than that. That would be too much for me. But they worked out to like $10 each, and I was like, okay, fine. Like, if I'm not paying like $20 for a piece of meat like this, then fine.
No, for sure. But that's BC though. Like in BC, meat was always a struggle for us too. Unless
it's been so expensive for so long now.
Yeah, unless you're just buying chicken. You're shit out of luck in BC, and that's kind of always been what it is. But I think it also has to do with the fact that in the West there seems to be this, and West by West I mean like Canada, United States, New Zealand, Australia, Britain, and Western German nations. It feels like there's been this calculated move toward stripping out the natural and replacing it with the superficial, and now that's what we're seeing with this trans activism, is that it's not just a matter of compassion and tolerance for people who suffer from a mental illness, because that's what gender dysphoria is, right? It's encouraging people who may or may not have that mental illness to traverse that path, right? And that's really, and it's just the human version of everything else that we've been doing in terms of our art, our architecture, everything that you see around you. Like your observation is absolutely on point. I know Tucker Carlson does talk about it a lot, but it's kind of this, at least for me, this calculated effort to just undo whatever's natural and replace it with something completely manufactured.
Mm-hmm. So then you have no idea what's natural anymore. Like,
exactly.
You can see that in medicine and the medical industry, where if you go to the doctor, they're just going to give you a prescription for a drug that's probably going to have a lot of terrible side effects and probably isn't actually really going to address your issue. Like, it might address some of your symptoms, it might make you feel better in some ways, but the side effects are almost never a fair trade-off. And the reality is that most of these illnesses can be addressed by changing your diet and your lifestyle, and paying attention to the ingredients on the things that you're buying in the grocery store, or even like what's in your soap and your shampoo and all of these things. But most people would have no idea, because they're buying food is good, you eat food, you need food. It wouldn't occur to you to study all the ingredients and figure out what they are and realize that you're eating a lot of things that are really bad for you and they're messing with your hormones, and so that will mess with your mental health and make you feel depressed or like mess up your metabolism or make you feel sick or whatever. But yeah, we have no idea. We've been totally detached from nature and what's natural and totally disconnected from our bodies. I think that there's so many people who don't even know what it feels like to be healthy. And they don't know when they are unhealthy because they're not connected to their bodies anymore. And we can see this in like the medicalization of birth and things like that too, where it's become totally normalized, where you're not even supposed to be present when you're giving birth. Women are pressured to be, knocked out, to not really feel it, to not be involved in the birth, and pressured to sort of hand over the entire process to a doctor who wants to get you in and out as quickly as possible. That's the goal, as opposed to, a positive experience for mother and baby.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think that there's, that point that you raised about being disconnected from our own bodies. I think that's a huge one. And I think a lot of the connection to ourselves has to do with our connection to nature, right? It has to do with our connection to the outside world. And, I read a while ago that before the 20th century, the average human being was spending something like 2/3 of their life in nature, outside in the elements. And now we spend less than 2% of our lives outside, breathing the fresh air in nature.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, we're just deeply disconnected, and I think that's what's leading to a lot of this. I think that's what's led to the narcissism that we see in this younger generation, and in ours as well. I'd say ours definitely suffers from some of the same challenges, but it's like, this is actually a good segue into your most recent piece that I absolutely fucking loved, and this one spoke to my heart because it's exactly how I felt for the longest time. You're the sellout generation. You wrote about what it means to sell out and how for us, and this is so true, because you and I kind of grew up in the same place around the same time. Selling out was a big fucking deal to us. Like if you sold out, you were fucking done. You were written off, like authenticity was absolutely key. And it's funny because I watched a documentary on Andre 3000 the other night, Andre 3000 from Outkast, and just how I was thinking, if Andre showed up today, there's no way that he would have been who he became, because there would have been this pressure from the moment that he put on a wig and some ski boots and frilly pants to kind of manifest that into a bigger brand, into a social media following, into a TikTok personality. We would have never had all of the beautiful music that Andre 3000 has created. And it was because he had to fight and swim upstream in the late 90s, right? Until people just accepted that he was undeniably dope, that he was fully able to be himself in all of his artistic expression. Whereas now, if somebody shows up doing that, it feels like an act. It feels like a performance. It feels superficial and inauthentic, because 90% of the time it is. It's just a way to grab people's attention. And so can we talk about that piece a little bit? What inspired you to write it, and what are the core ideas in it? Because I feel like I might not be able to articulate it properly.
Well, I mean, it's something that I've been noticing in the younger generations for a long time, and it just makes me feel kind of distressed and depressed because Gen Z doesn't know the difference between something that is mass produced and something that is marketed, and something that is a product that's being sold to them, and something that's organic and authentic, because there's no organic and authentic anymore. They just don't see that. That doesn't exist in music anymore. I think I was thinking about it first and primarily in terms of music. And, you can think of it in the way that, like, everyone in hip hop in the 90s came up, which was, from the ground up, from the street. They started small and became big, often from people passing around mixtapes. And, maybe your mixtape gets into the right place and your song gets played on the radio. That's also what happened in rock for a lot of these bands in the 60s and the 70s. And that's not how things go anymore. Now they pluck somebody that out of wherever they find them and turn them into a celebrity or a pop star and mass produce their music and overproduce their music to the point where, you don't even know if this person actually has any talent or not. You have no idea if this person is a good singer or if they're good at writing lyrics or they're good at making music. And the fact that people can't tell the difference between that is one thing, but they don't care. Like when I criticized Taylor Swift, which I got like so much backlash for, people were so angry that I said that Taylor Swift was boring.
It's so crazy that would happen too.
So more angry than about almost anything I've ever done. I was called so many names. Adult people were really angry at me about saying that Taylor Swift was boring. But like that, it's not okay. You like a pop song. There's pop songs that I have liked. I just mentioned on Twitter that I liked Mbop. That's a good song, but I'm not going to be like, these guys are the greatest musicians to ever have lived. And those guys actually were musicians. They played their own music. So that's good for them. But, like you're treating a pop star as some kind of genius and she did it all on her own, which is all bullshit. She had a father who had connections and money and paid for her to get in with the music industry. And then she was manufactured and sold as the product Taylor Swift that Taylor Swift TM today. She's copyrighted. Yeah. Her name's copyrighted. I was trying to make a t-shirt a while ago that said Taylor Swift sucks, and I wasn't allowed to because Taylor Swift is copyrighted. I'm not allowed to put that on a t-shirt.
But that's crazy. I just want to stop there because it's wild that even just those two words put together is a business unto itself, right?
Yeah.
Like it's
corporation.
Right. That's how corporate it really is. It's just those two words next to each other becomes an entity.
Fine, that can be a thing. Maybe you could say that's always been a thing, but people aren't bothered that that's a thing. They don't care. And I mean, in hip hop, selling out was a big deal. And it was something that you would be criticized for doing by all these other hip hop artists and by fans. Like I remember when Black Eyed Peas brought on Fergie and I was like, what the fuck? Like, fuck off. Because they used to be kind of like, they used to be an underground hip hop group. And then they decided they wanted to go in this other direction. And the woman that was in their crew before, whose name I don't remember, but she was awesome, left because she didn't want to do that. And they brought on Fergie and basically became like a pop group. And I was like, fuck them.
If you ever want to have like a really fun, if you ever want to do like a fun, like, those find the hidden thing in the picture where you're like you got to find all the hidden objects. Watch a Black Eyed Peas video and just count the number of product placements that are in there. The only person that I've seen who has more product placements in their video is Eminem. He's the only one.
Oh, I hate
Eminem. Yeah, it's gross. It's so gross. Like I've had this argument with people so many times that like Eminem may be technically one of the greatest rappers of all time, but
I'm not going to say that he's unskilled, but I don't enjoy listening to him, and I respect him.
That's right. He's by and far and away the most corporate. And you said something in that article which really jumped out at me, which is, talking about becoming a brand. Because as a young music artist myself, what turned me away from making music, ultimately why I stopped, was that branding conversation, because people would always be like, hey, you got to promote yourself as a brand. And to me, that was so fucking gross. I'm like, I'm just making shit that's in my heart. And I don't really care if people like it or not. Like it's got to come from my heart. And if people like it, great, because they're connecting to me, not a product, right? And now that my podcast is doing well, I get emails from people like, hey, let me help you turn this into a brand. Let me help you with your branding. And it's so fucking gross. Like every time I just want to write every awful, horrible, aggressive word that I know in my response and just hit send because it's so fucking gross. A year ago, I started to, well, not a year ago, but 6 months ago, I started to build a studio because I was like, okay, the background's got to look better. I've had a number of people tell me, you got to have a better background and better lighting. And then I was like, fuck it. You know what? I'm going to keep doing it here in my bedroom for now. In the future, it'll change. But for now, I want these conversations to feel real. I want it to feel like we're having a real conversation, and I feel like me being in this room where I actually lay my head at night kind of helps that. It helps people to understand that, like, this is a real conversation. This isn't something that I'm manufacturing for the sake of being a brand, and I just think that approach to art, it's not art. Once you start talking about something as content or as a brand, you've lost all authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to make the conversations better because you're in a more expensive looking studio. And it's not going to force people to listen to your podcast because you're in a more expensive studio. I will often look at my video and be like, this doesn't look as good as, Chris Williamson's podcast looks like or whatever. Or, whoever. I'm like, how do these people afford these fancy studios? Who is giving them all this money? I just don't, that's not my world. And I don't know those kinds of people. And I always say, I'm not good at making money, or I say, I'm not a capitalist, but I've done that on purpose too. That's not, I don't want to be good at getting money. I would like to have more money, and obviously I want to be producing a good quality podcast, but that's not why I do this. I started doing this because I liked doing it, and then it turned into something bigger completely organically. I started doing, I think I told you this in our last interview, I started doing a radio show in a pirate radio station in the middle of a sheep field, and then when I went back to Vancouver to go back to school, I got involved at Vancouver Co-op Radio, and then we started podcasting and I started blogging, and it, turned into a thing because I built up an audience organically because they wanted to read what I had to say or hear what I had to say. And I like what I do, and I want to continue to like what I do. So I don't want to turn it into some corporate enterprise where I'm more invested in my investors or in advertisers or whatever than what I do. And that's not what's really respected nowadays. What's respected is kind of having a slick look and having a fancy studio and, having everything sort of done really perfectly for you by other people. I still do everything myself, but again, I do it on purpose. I want to have control over what I'm doing. And yeah, it's weird how quickly our values changed. The Taylor Swift thing again, it's like her fans don't see the difference between her and, Janis Joplin. They're like, but she's a woman who's successful. I'm like, well, she's a successful, well-selling product. And
Right.
I don't understand why you wouldn't have a different level of respect for, someone who came up naturally, or Carole King or, Lauryn Hill or whoever, than you would somebody who was plucked out of wherever to be turned into this famous pop star. And, none of that happened organically. But nobody cares. People don't care. To me, that's a criticism. And to them, they're like, so what? I like her songs.
And that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, it is.
But
is
you
fine.
can't.
You can there's Justin Bieber songs that I like, but I'm not gonna be a super fan of Justin Bieber.
Yeah, you don't put him in the same class as Jimi Hendrix or or anyone of that caliber, right? Like,
No.
again, I was watching that documentary on Andre 3000, and just because he's so fascinating to me. I mean, he's arguably the best that ever did it, and he just doesn't do it anymore because his heart's not in it, right? And like, you got to respect that, because it's like, same with Mos Def. Like, Mos Def, in my opinion, is one of the greatest who ever, like, for people listening, if you want to listen to one of the best rap albums of all time, listen to Black on Both Sides. It's amazing from start to finish. And he moved to Africa and he's gone. Like, he left Hollywood, left all of that shit behind. And I really think that the whole turning music into a business thing, Jay-Z really popularized that. And it's funny because now, as an adult man, I can't listen to his music at all. There was this like weird moment, like growing up as a kid, I was a huge Jay-Z fan. And then once I became an adult, I was like, this dude's just wagging his dick in my face all the time. Like, I
know, he's always advertising his lifestyle. Like, him and Beyonce are just advertising elitism at every turn, and it's
exactly, it's gross. Like, it's like gross. But he introduced that concept of like branding. He introduced that concept of like operating like a corporation rather than an artist. And I'm like, for me, I'm very much in the same vein as you. Like, I just do what I love to do, and if people like it, great. If they don't, then too fucking bad. I'm still gonna do it. Profit and popularity and followers and all that other shit has never been part of my motivation. It just hasn't been. And it's nice when people like what you do.
Well, yeah, and you need, like, I make a living off of this, so of course I need an audience and I need a following, but I don't need to be the biggest. Like, I don't need to be huge. It doesn't need to be that slick. As long as people appreciate what I'm doing and I like what I'm doing, as long as I'm still interested and engaged in what I'm doing, which I am, then that's like the dream. I do work that I love to do. I do exactly what I want. I do it on my own time, relative, I'm obviously working with a lot of other people.
Right.
But, like, I get to, make my own schedule, and I can travel and be in different places and do my work, and I'm learning all the time, and I get to interact with all these cool people, and nobody's going to tell me that I can't do it. It's a great, and, to me, an extremely important freedom. And you wonder why they feel depressed or anxious despite the fact that they're very successful, but that's why. It's because they're not following their heart and integrity and their dreams. And it doesn't mean that every job you have to do has to be like your true passion, but selling out is bad for the soul, I think. And people don't realize that. So that's, it's like, why do you feel depressed? Like, why do you hate your life when theoretically you're successful? It's because you sold your soul. It's because you're a sellout, and you know it, and you know that you have no integrity. And I don't think you can be a happy person if you have no integrity. How can you like yourself if you have no integrity?
Yeah. And you know what? In the words of the great Kamala Harris, you are unburdened from the trappings of false branding. Let's say that.
Yeah.
Well, Megan, I know you've been talking all day, and I don't want to keep you too long. I love everything you do, man. I'm such a huge fan of yours, and it's so cool that we come from the same place, and it's so cool that I get to talk to you and stuff. Like, just everything that you put out there, man. It's like, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you have to say, but it's like, fuck, man. I'm like, dude, you just go for the fucking throat. You're like, this is what is she, just a fucking assassin. Every time I go online, I'm like, holy shit.
Freedom, baby.
No, for real, Megan, you have the honor of being the first person canceled. And I just love that you're still doing it, man. And it's we didn't even get to talk about this, but it's a fucking shame that every time you book a venue to hold an event or do a speak publicly, can we talk about that for a sec? What the fuck happened this time? What happened this time?
I mean, the venue caved. Like, it's the same thing that happens every single time. And it's why we usually keep the venue secret, is because every single time we plan an event, the trans activists go on a harassment campaign and start calling and emailing the venue and threatening them and telling them that they're, hosting hate speech, and threatening them legally and saying they're going to drag them through a human rights tribunal, but also, saying that we're violent, dangerous Nazis. People show up at the venue. There's usually vandalism. The staff usually get really scared. So in this case, we didn't keep the venue secret because we hosted an event at the venue already, and it went really well, and they were really pleased, and they had wanted us. This is the Ambrosia Banquet Hall in Victoria. They we were completely transparent about everything that we did. They had our poster, the name of the event. We told them that it was controversial and why it was controversial, and that they were going to get harassment and protests. And they're like, no, that's all fine. We support you. Like, we're on your side. We don't care about the harassment or the protests. We'll never cancel you. So this time we went public with the venue, and what we predicted would happen, what always happens, what we told them would happen, happened. And they caved, and they turned on us and basically tried to suck up to the trans activists. So they were like, we had no idea these people were hateful bigots, and we are an inclusive venue, and love is love. Please host your binder party here. So I think that, like, after we got, so they canceled us. They posted about it all over the internet, basically, in my opinion, trashing us, going along with the TRA narrative that we were hate speech people, and that we were not welcome at their venue. And it's like, no, we are welcome at your venue. You welcomed us, liars. But you're just trying to, save your ass, I guess. And so the TRA, as a trans activist, then after we got canceled, booked the venue for their own little queer party event where they were going to give out free binders to girls and all this other gross stuff. So, it was like, it's totally predictable, but it's still so fucked up when it happens. It's stressful, and it's exhausting, and it's depressing, because you're just like, what? We can't even have this conversation, which is a perfectly normal conversation to have. You shouldn't trans kids. Women's sports are for women. Like, this is pretty basic stuff.
Right.
We can't even have these conversations anywhere in Canada because no venue will have us. And the venues that will have us suffer such extreme consequences and harassment that it's not really worth it for them.
Yeah.
The people who stay strong and don't cancel us are people who are principled, which matters very little to most people in the world nowadays, apparently. But it's hard on them, and it's hard on them forever. The harassment doesn't go away. The TRAs do not let up. They're intense, man.
Yeah.
And so we have secured another venue, but we're keeping it secret until day of. So if you buy a ticket, if anyone's listening and they're in the Victoria area or on Vancouver Island or on the mainland in Vancouver or the suburbs and want to come over on the ferry, we're bringing in Linda Blade, who is amazing, and she's moving away to India, so get her while you can. No, she's still in Canada. She's been a huge advocate for women and girls sports in Canada, one of the only people who've stood up against this as an ex-athlete and a coach and the head of Athletics Alberta. She's the one that I had on the podcast recently to talk about Imane Khelif, and Mia Hughes, who's the author of the WPATH Files with Michael Schellenberger's organization. I'll be there. Bryony Dixon will be there, and this wonderful young woman, Magdalena, who got caught up in the trans cult in Vancouver and has a pretty heartbreaking story, but she managed to escape, not completely unscathed, but relatively unscathed. She did get a mastectomy, but stopped there, so she didn't do any of the hormone treatments or anything like that. So she's not, she, you know, her voice hasn't changed permanently. She doesn't have hair in weird places permanently. She didn't mutilate her genitals. She hasn't been sterilized. So she'll be there to talk about her story. And yeah, if you buy a ticket, then we'll let you know what the venue is the morning of, so that we can actually have the event and have the conversation. And yeah, it's we're selling tickets at tickettailor.com, and you can find a link via my Instagram profile. I have a Linktree link up there, or on my Substack. But yeah, it's brutal. It's just like, it's, I don't see anyone else in Canada getting canceled the way that we've been canceled every time. It's always just me and some women too, right? Like,
I was gonna say
it's me and like two other women who are just volunteers, just because if we don't do it, no one else will. So we're doing all of it ourselves. We're doing all of the organizing, all of the fundraising, all of the everything. We have some volunteers over on the island who help us out, which is amazing. We have like a pretty cool community of people in the valley, like in Cowichan, which is awesome. Like freedom people, really. Freedom people are the people who've been helping us and supporting us over here. But it's just us. Like, it's like, why are you trying to destroy us, these people who have relatively no power? I mean, it just goes to show, I think, that these people know that they don't have a leg to stand on. Like, they know that if anybody just hears us say these regular words, then they'll be like, oh, that makes sense, and you're bad.
Well, yeah, I mean,
or this doesn't make sense.
Well, they know that they know that their subjective view on reality does not hold up against the objective. So when intelligent biological women show up to say, hey, you're just because you cut off your dick doesn't mean you're a woman, it scares the shit out of them, because you're challenging their ideology. And when you challenge it, it doesn't hold up to even the slightest pushback, right? It falls immediately. And that's really all you all are doing. I mean, you know, I think about some of the stuff, like I listen to your podcast and I think about some of the stuff that you talk about. And I'm like, this would have been fucking mundane 30 years ago. Like, people would be like, yeah, no shit, you know, but here you are. I mean, this rebel feminist, you know, who's pushing against feminism itself, third wave feminism, you know. It's like, it's fucking wild that we've landed here. But to cap this off, I will say, Megan, I'm glad you're here. And, you know, I'm happy that, you know, I can call you a friend, and that I love reading everything you write. You just, every time I'm just like, holy shit, you're just going for it. I love it.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. I super appreciate it. And yeah, I'm glad that you're here and doing what you're doing as well. And I'm happy to talk to you anytime. I really, really enjoy our conversations.
Oh, thanks, Megan. Yeah, it's been really cool, you know, because like for myself, I felt alone for like a really long time, you know, and it wasn't until I started doing this that I started meeting all these really brilliant people like yourself, and realizing that, number one, I have a lot to work on for myself. You know, I have a lot of steps to climb, but there are like-minded people. And I think ultimately in the end, we're going to win this thing, just because we're on the side of reason. We're on the side of logic. And, you know, not to get all spiritual on this, but I believe we're on the side, on God's side, whatever your God may or may not be. But I believe that's where we are. And I think that's why your voice is so powerful, and why every time you show up, you scare the life out of everyone else who's on the opposite side, right? And they got to shut you down and hand out, you know, binders to the little girls, which is just, you know, what the fuck, you know, like, you know. Anyways, Megan, before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yes. MeganMurphy.ca is my Substack. That's where you can find my writing and my podcast. I'm on X at Meghan E. Murphy, and I'm on Instagram at Meghan Emily Murphy.
Awesome.
Oh, and the podcast is called The Same Drugs. I forgot. I'm so bad at promoting.
You need work on your branding. I'll send you an email after. We'll work on your branding a little bit. Megan, thank you so much once again. Honestly, like I'm really really in awe of the stuff that you do and your courage and your bravery, and you're so stunning, so brave, but in, really in real life. Yeah, I'm just always in awe of the things that you have to say. And yeah, for everybody watching or listening, please go listen to Same Drugs. Go follow Meghan. Like, it's well worth your time. Meghan's one of my favorite people to get information from. So yeah, go follow her, go listen to her stuff. And Meghan, thank you again. It's been awesome.